All publicity is good publicity. During UFC 310, after Anthony Smith got the beat out of him by Dominic Reyes, the camera shifted to Jamahal Hill, drawing boos from the crowd.
Joe Musgrove with us, as is the former UFC light heavyweight champion, Jamahal Sweet Dreams Hill.
The negative reaction stems from his behavior following his loss to current UFC light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira earlier this year at UFC 300. The thing is, I don't think people understand Jamahal Hill. He might be salty, or he's just a sore loser, but in my opinion, everything he's doing is very intentional. Since UFC 300, Hill has been actively beefing with the light heavyweight division. Footage out of the UFC PI was released, where Hill confronted Pereira. The confrontation didn't lead to any fighting, despite Pereira tossing gloves at Hill. Hill repeatedly declined the invitation for a fight. This video didn't do any favors for Jamahal Hill in the public eye, but it did one thing: gain attention. The video has 1.5 million views on Twitter, a video that has been seen by fans, casuals, and especially the MMA media. On Twitter, he's publicly replying to Alex Pereira, a reply that has 3.4 million impressions. He went after Michael Bisping on Twitter after Bisping said some supposedly bad comments towards Hill on his podcast. He yawned after Pereira TKO'd Jiří Procházka in a very interesting way. He replied to Magomed Ankalaev after Ankalaev called him a bum on Twitter.
You remember how you got a title shot, just, you know what I mean, given whenever the belt was vacant, and you fumbled it because you couldn't stop leg kicks, or you decided to be a crotch sniffer for the last 2 rounds or whatever.
To say that all of what he's doing is anything short of intentional shit stirring is, in my opinion, wrong. This isn't delusion. It might be saltiness, but it's very intentional, and it's working. Alex Pereira is the king of the light heavyweight division in the UFC, and he's an entertaining fighter to watch. He's unbeaten at light heavyweight, and of his 9 wins in the UFC, 7 were all TKOs or KOs. He's one of the faces of the promotion and has garnered fans worldwide. There's one downside: he's 37 years old.
Oh my God!
In the fight game, that's old, and typically means the beginning of the decline of his career. We've seen this in former champions of similar age, like Alexander Volkanovski, Kamaru Usman, and a few other non-championship fighters. He realistically has one more fight after fighting the number 1 ranked Magomed Ankalaev. If he wins, there's a question mark as to who he'll fight next. There have been some talks of a Jon Jones super fight, which I'm sure Pereira wouldn't hesitate to agree to do. It would be a massive money fight. However, I don't think this is very realistic. At the end of the day, the UFC is a business. If the UFC wants to maximize their profit, they would keep Jon Jones in the heavyweight division against no one else but Tom Aspinall, and keep Alex Pereira in the light heavyweight division. Better to have 2 championship fights as opposed to 1 mega fight. Pereira cleared out the heavy hitters in the division. He beat Jan Blachowicz, Jiří Procházka twice, and Jamahal Hill. He's so good they gave him Khalil Rountree Jr., who's ranked number 8. He reminds me of UFC flyweight champion Alexandre Pantoja, where they're both so good and so active that they're forcing the UFC to give them fighters that aren't in a top 5. There is no clear contender other than the winner of Jiří Procházka versus Jamahal Hill for the next person to get a shot at the light heavyweight championship. Assuming Ankalaev is unsuccessful in dethroning Alex Pereira, who else to better to step into the octagon other than the guy who he's been beefing with in real life and on Twitter than Jamahal Hill? The biggest star the UFC has is, without a doubt, Conor McGregor. How did he rise to stardom? He talked a lot of trash. And yes, he backed it up in the cage, fighting at an elite level and adding himself to the short list of double champions in the UFC. But he did talk a lot.
Who the f*** is that guy? Who the f*** is that?
McGregor was very good at selling fights, whether it be his antics outside of the UFC or during the pre-fight press conferences. People knew Conor McGregor and they wanted to see him. This all translated into record pay-per-view buys, literally being the top 5 in UFC history. You know who else is really good at selling fights? Someone who people believe is delusional, someone people can't wait to see get knocked out? Jake Paul. Paul advertises himself as the guy everyone wants to see get beat up. Some fans think he's a nuisance in the grand scheme of combat sports. Sound familiar? Say what you want about Jake Paul, but his methods translate into cold hard cash. Look at Paul's last fight against Mike Tyson. While the fight itself was a sparring match at best, the two ran away with an estimated of $60 million, 40 for Paul, 20 for Tyson. Jake Paul transfers the hate towards him into a discussion and money. I call it the Jake Paul effect. Is there any real difference between what Jake Paul does and what Jamahal Hill is doing? Now, I'm not equating Jake Paul to Jamahal Hill in terms of combat skills. Hill is clearly a decent MMA fighter. Jake Paul's an okay boxer. But I think Hill is putting on his best Jake Paul impression and trying to become the heel of the UFC. Nothing sells pay-per-views like wanting to see you get flatlined by others in your division. A lot of people think Jamahal Hill is salty or embarrassing himself. I think he understands that at the end of the day, everything these fighters do is for money. In the words of the notorious Conor McGregor via Khabib Nurmagomedov,
time come, it was like I was preparing so hard. When time come and inside the cage, when he said this to me, it's like I was talk with him like crazy, and he give back to me like, hey, it's only business. It's like, it sounds like, it's like when my father...
Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like and share the video, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And that's all. Adios.